in outdoors in the streets, usually stopping traffic. The work is sort of founded on being disruptive and usually raising awareness ferociously around trans rights and what's happening to trans rights in American legislation laws. And when I met her, it actually changed the course of what I thought my work was going to be, and that I'd never considered performing an option for myself. And after meeting her and working briefly with her, something quite new clicked for me, new and old. And when I returned to the UK, I was determined to create live work and kind of press pause on my theatre writing work. So I started performing in bars, basements, or queer venues, and started producing my own nights after I kind of established myself as a name in queer circles. And the night that I produced platformed artists, queer artists who I felt like have less of a platform in queer performance circles. So artists who are making work that is sort of between and around the lines in terms of form, and work that is quite challenging generally for audience. It's not, it's quite far from RuPaul's Drag Race, or like, not that I, you know, and I love all forms of drag, and I knew that I wanted to make a space that was offering a platform for what I was thinking of some of the most like radical drag and performance art on the queer scene at the time. So that space really offered me the opportunity to find out what kind of work I wanted to make, and to kind of take time on my terms, figuring out what that might look like. I guess it was in 2017 that I infuriatingly and sadly encountered violence in a men's toilet. At that time, my way, quite different now, but at the time, my way of dealing with trauma would be to make work around that event. So I created a performance installation called Urinal Residency, and this performance was a touring installation in which I transformed men's toilets and performing inside them, creating a sort of something that had been a dangerous and violent space to me, recreating it and reimagining it as almost sort of like what my bedroom was like at the time. And it involved drag, makeup, dressing up, undressing, music, dance. It was sort of really actually, and it was an endurance performance piece, so sometimes it would last up to 7 hours. And then audiences of around 10 to 12 people, depending on the size of the toilet, would come in, observe. It wasn't an interactive piece, so I wouldn't talk to the audience or interact, but and it would change depending on sort of the space that I was working within. And this was a piece of work that Jenna Mason, who was the curator at the time at the V&A, saw and suggested that it should be part of their curation around deconstructed masculinities at the V&A. As soon as it was suggested to me, I could see exactly how that would work and how I wanted to do it. But again, I come back to the importance of, without a curator like Jenna Mason, I wasn't going to write to the V&A Museum and pitch this piece to them. And it was really important that she had the imagination for that work that I didn't have at that time. And that really was a turning point for my work. And for my creative career, because suddenly I was an artist that performed in gallery spaces and museum spaces, and that changes how you're seen as an artist, versus how queer artists are looked like who primarily perform in, as I was at the time, basement DIY queer spaces. There's a massive divide between, you know, this idea of like, have you crossed over or not? And so it was an opportunity for me to reimagine where my work could be shown, and to think about also like how to deal with audiences that are not queer and aren't necessarily on my side in the same way. There's a lot I learned from that performance, and it was performed to close to 400 people coming in small groups into that bathroom. So it was also exhausting, but that was a really great experience. And from then, I feel like my work and how I perceive my work has shifted in various interesting ways. Also, since then, I've really shifted away from making my trans and queer identity central in my work. That was very important for a time, but I'm so excited about spaces that want to platform queer and trans artists who have multiple intersections of identity that they're wanting to explore, not even identity, just multiple forms of storytelling. And I'm excited about spaces that really give queer artists the autonomy to be whole, and not to only be interested if we're talking about our, you know, being queer and being trans. And my exhibition coming up at Rich Mix, Passing Gloves, is really for the first time making space for my Jewish and queer selves to coexist and be whole within one piece of work. And it wasn't until lockdown where I realized that whereas I was so out as being trans and queer, I was not out to, you know, for lack of a better term, I wasn't really out as being Jewish. And what was going on there? Why was there no space for, why did I not feel that there was space to look at the various stories that I have to tell sort of as a whole, and not to feel compartmentalized? So Passing Gloves, the exhibition, is through lockdown, I've been interviewing Jewish families who have some connection to the world of boxing, which was a really significant part of Jewish history going right back to the early 1600s. I had no idea that it was. I only looked it up because I started boxing in my bedroom to pass the time in early lockdown. And of course, like any Jew, I ask myself when I start something new, I wonder if there are any Jews who do this. And then you find out, I'm like, yes, it's a beautiful, rich history that I discovered. And I wondered, what kind of lost stories are there? I mean, there are a couple of the famous Jewish boxers we know of, but many lost stories that haven't really made it through to having a Wikipedia page. So I was thinking about creating an immersive exhibition that platformed these lost stories, as well as for me to work with the wonderful filmmaker and photographer Sweatmother, who I worked with on making my own visual world around this subject. So the exhibition has this photo series, it has a film, and it has these lost archives, this kind of fantastic immersive soundscape, and it all sort of exists in one space. And for me, it feels like holding hands with my past, being, of course, it like features my queerness and transness, and I feel like the images hold that, but it's sort of, it's not focal in the same way that it might have been in my other work. And it's felt really exciting for me to go back into my heritage and also create proud, queer, beautiful Jewish imagery, which I don't feel like I've had a lot of access to. At this point, I'm going to read you sort of this, I guess it's a statement that is going to be part of the exhibition. So it's a little bit about my journey with this work, and so I'm just going to read that out now. In a black and white photograph, Harry Meisler stands proudly, fists up, the Union Jack sewn onto one leg of his boxing shorts and the Star of David sewn onto another. I came across this photo early on in lockdown 2020, after taking up boxing in my bedroom. I wondered whether there was a history or culture of Jewish boxers. Meisler was the first name to come up, an East End lightweight champion of the 1930s. I was moved by the image of him. The Star of David stitched alongside the Union Jack is nothing short of punk. These two symbols are ever in tension in my mind, and so I can only imagine the guts it must have taken almost a century ago to announce oneself as both British and Jewish, whilst close by Jewish people wore the sacred star to their death. I then discovered that Meisler was not alone in his trademark fighting apparel. Many other Jewish boxers from the time, including Jack Kid Berg, fought with the Star of David sewn onto their boxing shorts. These are images of resilience. They challenge centuries of anti-Semitic propaganda that aim to destroy Jewish men by depicting Jewish masculinity as feeble. Boxing elevated Jewish men from the persecuted margins of society. Paintings of Daniel Mendoza, a Sephardic Jewish boxer from Whitechapel, embody glory and strength of superhero proportions. There is a photograph of Jack Kid Berg in 1934, hair slicked back, long winter coat, stopped in the street by a group of kids waiting eagerly for an autograph. In the eyes of the public, these guys were rock stars. I've wanted to honor these lives whilst giving myself the opportunity to make work that explores my relationship to Jewish masculinity as a queer trans person. Like my Jewishness, I find that my transness is often invisible unless I put words to it. I have to say, I am trans before someone sees that my gender is not cis. Similarly, I have to say, I am Jewish before I'm seen as a Jew. I feel safe to say I am trans within queer and trans spaces. However, I must confess I have discovered that there is no space where I feel completely safe to say I am Jewish. I am always hyper aware of anti-Semitism wherever I am. My non-Jewish friends might be surprised to hear this, and I suppose that is part of the unsafe feeling. Most of my non-Jewish friends do not see anti-Semitism, and so how can they fight what they cannot see? Sweatmother, artist, filmmaker, and curator of the Otherness Archive, was the perfect collaborator for this project. The photographs and film that we created together hold hands with a history that has now almost entirely disappeared. The visuals also spotlight how these lives and experiences carry on in new forms and bodies. It has been an honor for me to meet the individuals who shared their family stories so trustingly and to hold them up within this visceral soundscape by musician Giora. who has mixed archival sounds of an infamous fight between Jack Kidberg and Harry Meisler with audio clips of contemporary boxing training and fused this with percussive sonics. I'm just going to stop there with that. So that doing the, launching this exhibition with Rich Mix has been really powerful because I won't say who, but I was originally going to launch the work at another gallery/museum space, and they found it very difficult that I was not going to be, as I was known as a performer, they found it very difficult to accept that I wasn't going to give a live performance within this exhibition, and we kind of kept on shifting the terms that they would allow this work to happen, and I was continually sort of starting to feel that if I went ahead with them, that I was compromising the work to such an extent it wouldn't have been the project that I had started making, and certainly not the work that I wanted to put out. And Rich Mix have been so wonderful. And I sent them an email around that time where everything was falling apart with this other place, and sent Rich Mix an email, and they got back pretty instantly. Everything just a big yes, and how can we make this work? Which is great, and trusting artists is really important, whether you as a curator or producer, creative director might understand the work, or you may actually think you as an artist would do it differently, but however you would do it, you need to put the artist's vision before your own, and think less about brands of a venue or of a space, and more about autonomy of artists and storytelling. And Rich Mix have really given me that, and I'm so excited about their support in just sort of supporting me in doing something I really care about, and that I think to a lot of venues sounds so niche, but when you see it all together, you realise the larger relevance of it, I feel. So they've been an incredible space, and trying to think what else I was going to say. You should come and see it. And yeah, I think it's really trusting artists, and I think also with the previous a lot of trans and queer people can just we look a lot younger than we are. I gotta say this, that sometimes we look a lot younger than we are, and sometimes spaces, and I get it a lot, but it's also a misogyny thing, right? It's kind of all a blend. Can treat you as someone who doesn't know what they're doing or doesn't have a clear vision, and it's something that I really noticed with cis run spaces is sometimes assumptions around queer and trans appearance, and people sort of not it's this, I don't know, yeah, I think that's it really, sort of. It's kind of, yeah, that, but I don't know, that's, yeah. Holly, do we have, I feel like I've gone over time, do we do a question thing now?
No, we're all good for time.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, no, we are all good.
Awesome.
Thank you for such a gorgeous talk. I feel like your perspective in this symposium is so valid, because I mean, I don't want to sort of pin you as the sort of the outsider, you know, I sort of, because it's more nuanced than that, because and also I kind of don't think that's always a productive kind of binary to make between, you know, museums professionals and then, you know, sort of outside artists, because I think you know, I think the really good thing is when there's a kind of collaboration, but I do think perhaps as you are not a museum professional and you don't sort of, for example, for instance, or you might do, but I don't think you do have a sort of day job in a museum. I think that your perspective is really valuable, because it shows how there can be this kind of collaboration between museum and heritage sectors and kind of different industries. And as you say, you have come from a kind of a bar background, similar to sort of my performance persona, Orlando, which I have failed to mention, and I do apologize to the audience, but I also perform in similar spheres to Orion. And yeah, we've kind of moved into gallery spaces as performers. But yeah, I think it's a really valuable dialogue and conversation to be starting between professionals and performers, and a kind of, I think what you're hinting at is wanting a more trusting relationship. I think I do understand where I do understand where you're coming from, because I think potentially there's a you know, there is the kind of the brand, and it's a kind of, and perhaps that does tap into very old strains of queer phobia, where there's a sense of, you know, ideas of respectability, and when actually, I mean, we mentioned, and I'm not saying anyone's a bad gay, but I'm mentioning the Bad Gay podcast because Dawn spoke about it in her talk. But you know, this idea of let's just keep it a bit more real, you know, it's sort of, it's a kind of, we're not here as kind of token queers, and when we bring queer people and queer performers into these spaces, you want it to be done in a way that's kind of respectful and authentic. And yeah, it's a kind of getting the balance between, and I think we would avoid kind of tokenism by having these respectful, mutual and collaborative approaches. So I really appreciate the kind of discussion you've had where, yeah, you know, you want to be seen on the same kind of, you want to be treated on that kind of same level of, you know, we're both here to kind of create public programming and to create something for an audience and to create a kind of public outreach project. So I really appreciated that facet.
Yeah.